timeline of events. It's not just that he told Zahara and Angelique in a hotel room. It's everything together. You put it all together and you get the true story. And you have an eyewitness to the tampering because you have Cassie, but you almost have an eyewitness to the murder. You have a slim eyewitness to the murder because you hear Gowker on the stand messing up, talking about the murder scene and saying, "we." I want to briefly touch on the medical testimony. You all, I'm sure, paid close attention, so I'm not going to spend a long time on it. But you heard from Nichols that there was nothing, Dr. Nichols, that there was nothing to prevent more than one person from walking around the body. Obviously, you see the pictures of where the body was. That the facial injuries could be caused by sharp injury, but they could be caused by forcing the head into the rocks. That he was hit in the head more than once, in his opinion. That his back was hit with a rod-like structure applied in the same direction. Person in the same foot place. That he could not say that only one person was down there. In fact, he said it could have been a whole party. That there is no way to tell how many blows to the head occurred. That there is no way to tell from what direction the head blows came. That he can't say that a bat didn't hit him in the back of the head. You also heard from Dr. Burroughs-Beckham. Repetitive blows to the same spot in the back of the head can cause a sharp force injury, what appears to be a sharp force injury to actually be a blunt force injury, because the tissue bridges that normally denote a blunt force injury end up breaking when the spot is hit over and over. She said the skin tag on the back of his head indicates at least 2 blows, that his face was probably punched, plus beaten into the ground, that the head injury could be a metal pipe, could be a baseball bat. She said she can't rule out bat. She said more than 4 blows, and that she can't say how many people. So what does the evidence show occurred on May 10th, 2011? This is what we know. We know there was a cooking. The tray ate at dusk. That Mackenzie slept on the couch. The tray snuck out. We know that this occurred long before Gowker and Amanda went to the Circle K. We know that Young was watching a movie 2 doors down at Cassie and John's. We know that the houses are close and that Cassie's is open to the ditch. We know that John Robertson's bat ended up missing. We know that Young had been noticing when the neighborhood lights went on and off. We know that Jeremy called Amanda at 10:30 and heard a male in the background. We know that the light got unscrewed because Detective Ross found it that way the next day. We know that Gowker went to Cassie's to get some things to spend the night. That Amanda and Gowker got in a fight that left bruises on her neck. We know that Trey was murdered. We know that it could have been one person and it could have been more. We know that it could have been a rod, and it could have been a rod and a bat. We know that after Trey was murdered, Young and then Gowker woke up Cassie and enlisted her for getting rid of a bag and a bat. And that Gowker went to the Circle K at 1:06. We know that Gowker knew that Trey was dead the next day. We know that Young knew what Trey was wearing after he wasn't supposed to have seen it. We know that Young told Angelique he did it, that he told Jahara he did it, that he told Cassie he did it, that he told John he did it. We know that Gowker must have a trial and said we. Sometimes I think this case gets framed as, did Josh Young help Gowker commit this murder? The question is actually, did Gowker help Young commit the murder? But that is not the question for you, because you are not Gowker's jury. There's no doubt that Gowker started this murder. An eye for an eye, you kill my kid, I kill yours. The seeds of this murder may have been planted 15 years before, when Amanda, instead of waiting for him to come back from Michigan, dated Terry Zwicker, a man he hated, and got pregnant. But it's hard to get Gowker there at the scene when you look at the timeline. Now let me be clear, I don't think for a second that Gowker isn't guilty of this. I think he started it, I think he put his son up to it. Look at the complicity definition, and there you go. He's guilty. But this is the reasonable inference, filling in the blanks from what we know. And that is that Trey and Josh Young snuck out together. They lived 2 doors apart. There's conflicting testimony on how, whether they were friends or not. But you know that they played video games together. You know that they had the same group of friends. They're at the same cookout. Hey, let's go to the creek later. Trey gets busted the first time. We know that. So he waits until Amanda and Josh either go to Cassie's or go to the bedroom, and then he sneaks out again, and Mackenzie sees him. She said he was getting out of there quickly. It's because he's running late. We know that John's bat was missing. They took that bat. Why did Trey think they were taking a bat down? I don't know. Maybe it was protection from the Bridgewood kids. Maybe just because it was dark. They probably do go down there to smoke pot. But before they can do that, as Young told John, he asked Trey what time it was. Trey pulled out his phone. What does a phone do? It lights up. He pulled out his phone, looked at the time. His eyes are blinded. And while his eyes are distracted by the light, he gets hit. Why did Young do this? Because of his father. Because he is finally back with his father. And he is desperate to impress him. And his father has put him up for this. And his father has just chastised him earlier that night for showing mercy. Being with my dad is better than being anywhere else. Was Galper there? I don't know. Look at the distance. Somebody's got to get all the way from there down to the creek. Could he do that without Amanda noticing? I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why she was marching down to Cassie's angry. But this isn't his trial. That's not something we have to prove. The medical examiner said it could have been one person, could have been more. Now, we do know that he was back and forth to Cassie's, and that Cassie and John went to bed fairly early after the cookout. So it's a fair inference that he was going to Cassie's that late to talk to his son. We know that in the middle of the night, 1:06, Galper goes to Circle K. Why does he feel the need to put himself on camera? Is it really because they're out of cigarettes? Or is it because he knows what went on at the creek? And he has to rush out and establish an alibi. This is not Galper's trial, and I don't have to prove if Galper was down at the creek. It's an interesting question. We know that Young and Galper woke up Cassie together, so we know he was involved to some extent. That they were both doing this together. You may remember that in his trial, when he was discussing giving custody of Josh Young, when he was discussing how he had plotted murdering someone while he was in prison, he said he couldn't do it right away because he had to jump through the CPS hoops. What did he mean by that? He could have killed Amanda or one of her children anytime he wanted. What would the CPS process give him that would assist him in this murder? Josh Young. Now, I'm not unaware of the challenges you face. It's a big challenge. He is a juvenile. You may be wondering if a child that young could swing a bat with enough force to kill someone. I remind you that younger boys than that can hit home runs. I also remind you that he was not sitting calmly in a courtroom wearing a sweater vest on May 10th. You may be wondering if he should be held accountable for something that his father convinced him to do. And as we have shown, he was doing this to impress his father. And I remind you, as we said in voir dire, a court has already determined that this is the appropriate place for this case to be heard. And it is not... Come on. your responsibility to worry about he was too young to be held accountable. The law decided that. Your responsibility is to determine whether we met the elements. That is the only question for you. You may be wondering if he was unduly pressured into this by his father. After all, he was young. He was in his father's care. But we as a society value life so much that you cannot kill someone and then say someone else made him do it and then get away with it. He had the free will to say no. No, Dad, I'm not going to do that. And afterwards, he could have said, Cassie, oh my God, you've got to take this to the police right away. But he didn't. He talked to police repeatedly without his father present, even after his dad was in custody in Alabama. He was not coerced into doing this. He bragged about it. He laughed about it. But if you were worried about whether his father's influence should affect your verdict, that is not one of the elements. You cannot look over at him and feel sorry for him because he looks young and then say not guilty for that reason. You cannot look over there and feel sorry because he had a bad dad and then say not guilty for that reason. You cannot say, I think he did it, but because he had a bad life, because he had a bad dad and was desperate to impress him, I'm going to subconsciously add reasonable doubt. You cannot let sympathy add reasonable doubt. You look at the facts, you apply them to the elements. The only question for you is whether we have met these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. I told you in voir dire I can't answer all the questions you have about this case. When people murder someone off camera, as they usually do, there will always be questions. But that doesn't mean that the murder wasn't committed. I asked you if I prove all the elements, even if you have questions about X or about 100 X's. What is your verdict if I prove all the elements? And you say guilty. If you know he has committed this murder, it is because we have proven it to you. You came in here knowing nothing about this case. Now you know more than you ever wanted to know. And if you know that the defendant committed the murder, it is because we have proven it to you beyond a reasonable doubt. You heard it from Cassie, you heard it from John, you heard it from Angelique, you heard it from Jahara, you heard it in the inferences from his father, and Paul Embry and Jason Bierman. Trey Zwicker was brutally murdered at age 14 when he was finishing his freshman year in high school. Because Josh Gauker is a control freak and because Josh Young wanted to impress him. Trey will never finish high school, never get to grow up alongside his dad, never get to take care of his sister, never get to find a girlfriend.
Yes, come on.
Utterly senseless and heartbreaking. One of the participants is being held accountable for it now, for the rest of his life. Now it's the defendant's turn,
he said thickly, wiping it away with his napkin. He withdrew from her and blew his nose. She dragged her chair to sit beside him and put a hand on his arm. He liked her so much better when she was silent and her face was soft and concerned as it was now. I still can't. He was a good bloke, he said thickly. Barry, he was a good bloke. Yes, everyone says that about him, said Kay. She had never been allowed to meet this famous Barry Fairbrother, but she was intrigued by this show of emotion from Gavin and by the person who had caused it. Was he funny? She asked, because she could imagine Gavin enthralled to a comedian, to a rowdy ringleader, propping up the bar. Yes, I suppose. Well, not particularly. Normal. He liked to laugh, but he was just such a nice bloke. He liked people, you know. She waited, but Gavin did not seem able to elucidate further on the niceness of Barry. And the kids, and Mary, poor Mary.